Arnaud is the Chief Coffee Officer at Bellwether Coffee, which manufactures the world's lowest carbon coffee roaster. A veteran of the industry, he was one of the first employees at Blue Bottle and went on to manage their first coffee operations and product. For the past 8 years, he's been working with Bellwether to build a delicious, profitable, and sustainable future for coffee roasters, farmers, and drinkers. This one is a special podcast. I could have gone off the rails more than a few times, but we stayed on track for the most part. Arnaud is a natural, so I hope you enjoy this week's episode of Kicking It with Christy. First, I'm going to kick this off with a quote because I was doing my research and I found this was kind of fascinating and I wanted to get your take on it. But the founder and chief executive officer at Compound Foods, do you know those guys? They're a beanless coffee company that aims to produce coffee in laboratory.
Oh, yes.
Do you know them? Okay, well, I'm kicking it off with this quote because I felt like this is a good segue into the coffee conversation. But she says it's a really complex situation because coffee is one of the main victims and contributors to climate change. And I'm curious because I feel like not everyone, but a lot of people, actually, I just started drinking coffee. I'm drinking espresso right now. It's not really espresso. It's espresso in coconut milk. But essentially, I think it's, and we don't have to go into the whole aspect around climate change and coffee, but I'm just curious, me knowing really nothing about the coffee industry, what are your thoughts to that quote? And I know you guys are changing it to some capacity at Bellwether.
Well, I think that I would disagree. I would sort of respectfully disagree with both sides of that equation. Coffee is not one of the major contributors to climate change in the sense that coffee, the plant, is not. It is, it's a plant, so at some level it's pulling CO2 out of the air. But beyond that, it isn't a particularly carbon-intensive thing to grow. I mean, it's famously grown successfully organically, and it is very possible to grow it with mostly fertilized with compost. I mean, it's also grown in a staggering diversity of environments. So there's some places where that is more true than others, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at coffee versus, let's say, palms, maize, soybeans, right? There's nothing inherently more carbon intensive about coffee than other things, and certainly less carbon intensive than things like maize or corn as we know it here, which tends to be a tremendous amount of petroleum-based fertilizers, right? And I think that on the other hand, the way that coffee is done today, specifically not so much the cultivation and harvesting, but a lot of the processing downstream of coffee can be very carbon intensive, right? But again, that's not something that's sort of intrinsic to coffee as a product, no more so than, like you might say like dropping your kids off at school is very carbon intensive. Well, I mean, it really depends on how far away from the school you are and what vehicle you take there, right?
Exactly.
But dropping your kid off at school is a beautiful thing. And so it's worth figuring out ways to do it well. It is true that coffee farmers are going to be among the earliest sort of social or economic groupings to be hit hard by climate change in their livelihoods. And that's happening today. And so there's something very real there. But I think that people are in a rush to declare defeat. Mm-hmm. When there is a tremendous amount of work that can be done to increase resilience in the coffee lands. And so sort of taking a look at a situation where we've been very extractive in the way that we, in our relationship with coffee farmers and coffee farming communities, and have driven them to the economic margins. In some cases have driven their land to environmental margins, right? And then we say, it's not even worth saving, it's a lost cause, is cynicism of the highest level. There is a responsibility and also a great possibility to reinvigorate coffee cultivation and make it a better livelihood for the 11 to 12 million people. There are 11 to 12 million smallholders that grow coffee as their primary means.
I'd love to kind of dive into the history behind coffee, right? Because I think that's pretty fascinating. But is Is it true that the coffee industry is a $468 billion industry?
Oh
Because
gosh, you know,
I read
you
that stat somewhere and I was like, that doesn't seem possible, but I guess it could be actually.
I don't, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. I think here in the US, if you count like the value of all coffee products consumed annually, it's like 40 billion, something like that.
Hmm. Okay, then that
Um,
would make sense on a
yeah,
global
like 10% of the world, right? And
scale.
we are not, Americans drink a fair amount of coffee, but like the Nordic countries and occasionally Central European countries always have us on coffee consumption on a per capita basis, right? And so coffee is the most consumed beverage after water in the world, right?
Hmm.
And you think
Yeah.
about like a country like Japan, right? And I think I had the same thing happen to me. I went to Japan for a while in business for coffee, and before I went, just thinking like stereotypes or whatever, I assumed that Japan was primarily a tea drinking culture.
Hmm.
But then after you go, you're left with the impression that certainly they must drink more beer than anything else because they drink a staggering amount of beer in
Hmm.
Japan, or they, at least they did when I was in Tokyo.
I've heard
But
that actually, which I was
yes,
really kind of shocked, to be honest.
but it's coffee. It's coffee, right?
Hmm.
And so coffee, yeah, I think that that is about right.
Hmm. Okay, interesting. And I guess okay, so going back to, the history behind coffee, can you go into that a little bit? And
Yeah.
I might say quickly that how long have you been with Bellwether? And your experience also came from not just Bellwether and
Hmm.
coffee, but you have a history of coffee. So if you want to share a little bit of that.
Yeah. I'll give you my capsule origin story and then the same for coffee as I see it. I've been with Bellwether now. I've been working with Bellwether in some form or another for about 8 years. I've been full time for about six. Um, and when I started here, it was really sort of very. I was a founding member of the company. It was a very raw startup. Um, uh, I came into Bellwether after a decade at Blue Bottle Coffee. That had been, in some sense, a similar story. I was their fifth employee, and so came in when it was very charming. We were, in the words of the founder, we were small and dear. It was like easy to root for us because we were sort of a bunch of scruffy people trying to make something happen at farmers markets. And that company grew very big, and I had a great education in coffee as it grew. Sort of went from barista. I did all manner of things. I managed wholesale accounts. I managed our farmers markets, whatever.
Hmm.
I bought green coffee for the company for a minute. I was a roaster there, prepared espresso machines for them, everything but the delivery driver. Then after I'd done those tasks, I started managing the operations that underpinned those tasks.
Hmm.
I founded our technical services department and based upon that production facility. And eventually was running the back of house for Blue Bottle. But even prior to that, if we're going back in time, college, I roasted coffee, a little coffee shop in my hometown.
No, this is amazing. You were coming in and out. So we'll have Shane edit that piece out, but this is like 1,000 times better.
Okay, yeah, I'm such an old podcaster. Actually, we made a podcast at Bellwether that took like forever to make, and so I'm used to doing multiple takes. If you want me to do my origin story again, you just
Oh.
have to say so, Christy.
Yeah, can you actually, it's really interesting. Can you do it again? Because
Yeah,
I
sure,
think it
sure,
will be fun.
sure.
So your origin story, Arno.
So I
Dive
guess
in.
but I'm going to take it in chronological order this time, Christy, because it's a little bit easier. So I think that probably for me, my life in coffee, so to speak, which has been this great career for me, it started when I was 13 years old, and my mom was an inveterate coffee drinker, and my parents were kind of hippies, kind of back to the landers, and so they had a Chemex pot, and they would grind their
Whoa. Wait, what's a Chemex pod? Go
a
into the
Chemex
detail there.
pot. Oh my gosh, I'm never going to get there. A Chemex pot is this thing that looks like an hourglass with its top cut off. It's two cones made out of glass, right? And you put a filter
Okay.
in the top part, you put coffee in there, and you pour your water in there, and then it extracts and it goes into the bottom
We
half.
have that. I have that in the kitchen. So my
I bet you do.
husband's like this weird coffee, I don't even know what to call him, but
Sounds like a good
he
guy.
you would like him, but he has that and then he has that other thing that you put on the burner that's glass and it's kind of a coffee
Oh,
contraption.
yes, yes, that's a siphon pot.
Yes.
Um, I lived in a house once earlier in my career where my housemates called that the coffee bong, and they like eagerly awaited Sunday mornings when I would make a siphon pot, because
Oh
the
my
coffee
gosh.
is really very excellent out of a siphon pot if it's done well. And it's so exotic to see and everything like that.
That's
Everybody
kind
in
of
Radioland should
that's
go
fun.
look up a siphon pot as it's actually brewing because it's really, it's like really delightful to see and really fun to do.
Well, I feel like if we had known that, you could have had one here and created that
Oh
because
gosh, you need to have quite a bit of, you need like an open flame or other heat source to run a siphon pot. So probably not right here where I'm doing the podcast, but,
Are you in
um,
the office today or where are you?
I'm in the office. I'm in a soundproof, telephone booth here within the Bellwether offices.
Oh, that's great. I'm in my son's bedroom,
Yeah,
which clearly you can probably
I
tell.
like bunk beds. I'm a bunk bed kid. Um, so anyway, let's go back in time.
Go
The
back. So
scene.
you're 13. You're
Yes, I'm
13 years
13 years
old.
old, which would have been 1988, and we're in southern Indiana, and kind of in the middle of nowhere, actually out in the country outside of Bloomington, Indiana, which is a small city in southern Indiana. And my mom was a very hardworking person. I mean, both my parents worked, blah, 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 but my mom was a consultant. She had a killer commute. She had to go into the office every day and she drank a lot of coffee. She does to this day. And when I was 13, I wanted a cup of the coffee and I asked, and she gave me a cup of coffee from this Chemex, that was like half coffee, half milk. And I remember my dad saying like, you're going to stun his growth. And my mom was like, it's half coffee, half milk. It won't be that bad for him. And I think what they couldn't have known was that they were setting me on a path, that then would become my passion and my career, right? But I
Mm.
liked it. I liked caffeine. I love caffeine to this day. I liked the taste of it, and I liked the ritual of it, and I liked having something that I could share with my mom. It was, of course, at 13, I also liked that I felt very grown up when I had it. So yeah, that was the beginning for me, and I didn't really think that much about it. I went to school and got degrees in German language and political science,
Hmm.
which in retrospect is those are the kinds of degrees you're gonna get if you end up in specialty coffee because we're like, again, the founder of Blue Bottle, used to joke it's the revenge of the liberal arts majors in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no degree for coffee. There wasn't at the time. There actually such things exist
Yep.
now.
Oh
But I
wow, I
collect,
didn't realize that.
yeah. So it was just a thing. It was like something that I enjoyed and I partook of a lot. I was always somebody who drank a lot of caffeine and a lot of coffee. And when I was in college, I got a summer job at this little cafe and roastery in my hometown called the Runcible Spoon. So huge plug for the Runcible Spoon. And anybody out there who's ever been, you know how great it is. They roasted coffee on site, which was unheard of at the time. Okay.
Mm.
Again, this is like the 90s. It was really not a thing that anybody did. And I learned how to roast coffee, sort of. We roasted it, I would say, in retrospect, maybe without super duper high skill. But it
Hmm.
was fresh roasted coffee, and we were known for that. And again, I graduated from college. I had a little career as a journalist, actually. And then uh, I moved out to the Bay Area and I took on 4 jobs, which is, I think, a kind of common occurrence for people who are moving to the Bay Area. This was in 2004. And one of those 4 jobs, I was like bartending and doing construction and writing for a
Mm.
magazine. And also I took a job as a barista. And that job as a barista was with Blue Bottle Coffee. And I was their 5th employee and kind of worked with that company for another decade. I had
That's really incredible. I mean, just
yeah.
because the one, and I always feel like as a parent, you make these decisions whether to expose your kid to something, and your
Hmm.
mom, that moment, just given what she was pouring from, or what that thing was called, I can't remember what you were calling
The
it, but
Chemex pot, yes.
a Chemex pot. But given that, kind of set you down this path, which is super
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I think for me, when I really decided on coffee as a career, again, this is like these days that's not such a exotic choice. But back
Hmm.
then, I think every like my dad was like terrified, you know. Um, he could not imagine that coffee could be a career. and
Hmm.
certainly not if you start off preparing lattes for people, right? But I think
Hmm.
that um, the like whole barista to boardroom trajectory is not unique to me. That's how a lot of people that ended up having careers in coffee, how we started, right? Which is something cool
Hmm.
about the industry. The industry has done pretty poorly, I would say, at extending this itself as a social mobility tool to all people, right? The people who have really come up through the ranks and flourished do tend to be they look like me. They're like kind
Hmm.
of there's a lot of white guys, to be totally blunt,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And the coffee industry traditionally has had a problem with, especially the coffee industry, with diversity and with encouraging diversity. Been, I think, in my experience, someplace where there's been quite a bit of implicit bias.
Hmm.
So, but at the same time, like you can do that in coffee. You can you can really start by just figuring out how to make somebody a drink and end by trying to set prices on dozens of shipping containers of green coffee and think about larger strategic questions and structural questions.
The origin behind coffee, for those who don't know, can you share a little bit about the origin story of coffee? And
Yes,
how
no,
did coffee become commercialized, which I think is kind of fascinating.
yes, absolutely. Now, editing tip, I didn't actually get to talk about Bellwether, which is the person who pays my paycheck. So let me get
Mm-hmm.
back to that. So after 10
We'll
years,
definitely come back, but yes, go. Keep
let me
going.
just
We
get
can.
it out of there and then we can move
Yeah,
on to
yeah,
coffee's
go,
origin story.
go.
So after 10 years at Blue Bottle, which was great, I had the opportunity to learn how to buy green coffee, how to roast coffee, and then I learned how to manage while still at that shop. And so after 10 years there, I um, first started talking to Ricardo Lopez, who's the founder of Bellwether Coffee. And Ricardo had this idea. He wanted to make a coffee roaster that would be easy to install in people's cafes because he saw a lot of people wanted to roast in their cafes, but it's pretty challenging to do because you need to get an exhaust stack through the roof, and they're like these large commercial appliances that burn lots of natural gas, and you need specialized skill, and you need to put like a velvet rope around it so no kids touch it.
Mm-hmm.
It's all sorts of like they don't are not actually super compatible with cafes, but it's such an important part of people's dream, right? He was like, I need to find a way to resolve this issue.
Hmm.
And at first blush, I told him it was never going to work. I told him it was a crazy idea, but I stuck around long enough that he convinced me. And we now manufacture a ventless electric coffee roaster. So you don't need to have an exhaust stack and you don't need any natural gas. And the roast process itself is automated. Humans design the roast curve,
Mm-hmm.
always a human, like it should always be a human in charge of determining what a human tastes, right? That's very important. But the machine is able to replicate that roast curve. And so you don't need to have somebody who stands there and just sort of controls the roaster. You just need a human to set the roast profile. So,
Hmm.
um, and just to get it out there, for us, a lot of it is really about global warming, and our system produces 87% less greenhouse gases per pound of coffee produced than a conventional roaster. And it's actually
So
quite a
what?
bit better if you're in California, or which has a very green grid. Most of the West Coast does, or if
Mhm.
you're in the Northeast as well, where a lot of the grid is powered by hydro.
Hmm. So I read somewhere there are over 2,000 coffee roasting companies within the United States, and then about 65,000 coffee shops. So are you if you did a blind taste test, right, between a roaster and Bellwether, and clearly I just started drinking coffee again after like 3 years, so I'm definitely not one to test this with. But um, can you really tell a difference? And then going back to the greenhouse gases, and can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's kind of fascinating. But 65,000 coffee shops
Right.
take or leave some, and then the 2,000 roasters. Can any and I have so many questions within this, so sorry, bear with me. But can any coffee shop just purchase one of these? Or how
Hmm.
big are they? Do you create
Yeah.
smaller sizes?
Well, let's tackle the taste question first. So when we
Mm-hmm.
designed the roaster, one thing that I was pretty adamant about is that we didn't need to like fix the way that coffee tastes. Okay, because
Mm-hmm.
uh, the in the last 20 years, it's become pretty easy actually to find good coffee.
Hmm.
There's been a tremendous amount of knowledge dissemination, and there are in fact training classes you can take. There are for-profit schools. The Specialty Coffee Association also offers classes where you can learn how to buy green to some degree by unroasted coffee, which is a very important contributor to quality, and how to roast, certainly how to brew beverages, right? Like when I started at Blue Bottle in 2004, that playbook wasn't out there, so we kind of had to figure it out. There's a tremendous amount of trial and error, right? And that was actually,
Yep.
there was also a lot of freedom for us. We felt like we can figure this out, right? Just try harder until you figured it out. But these days, there are no more secrets like that. So um, when we designed the roaster, we said the problems to fix are not that coffee doesn't taste good enough today. It's that it's being roasted in a manner which is inconsistent, highly inconsistent,
Hmm.
and I would say it's just not appropriate technology. It's no longer compatible with the needs of the world today. Your basic roaster design, what they call an open flame drum roaster, is a design that harkens back to the 19th century, right? That's like, I think, but it has antecedents well before that, actually. And it is a really, really simple device. It makes great coffee, but it expends a tremendous amount of natural gas to do so. And it produces a lot of very thick smoke as well, right? And so it's energy intensive, but then it also produces a big effluent stream, like a lot of pollution. That pollution, most people never see because it's burned off in most cases in what's called an afterburner, which is a fancy word for a giant natural gas flame, right? So the energy used to roast the coffee is often less than the energy that is used to clean off the smoke from roasting the coffee. Okay? It's not insignificant, the amount of natural gas that is used there. The other problem is, I mean, I want to say it's not, it depends on your perspective. The, it is a lot of fun to roast on one of these things. Okay. And I like old contraptions generally. Like I drove to work today in my 1981 Toyota pickup truck, right? And I love
Hmm.
it. I love it. I've had it. It's been my daily driver since 2007. Okay, but I don't drive it very far every day. My wife and I have an electric car that we use when we actually need like a functioning modern automobile, right?
Hmm.
But for the two
Yep.
mile commute into work or to drop my daughter off at school, it's fun and it's neat, right? And I guess this is my point with these old open flame drum roasters. They're really fun to work on,
Hmm.
but it's hard to get the same coffee out of them every time because they're very manual and they're very subject to ambient conditions. So if it's cold
Mm. So it's
outside,
a
your
little
roaster
bit
is actually colder.
inconsistent.
They're
Hmm.
quite inconsistent. Now, if you're an expert roaster, you can mediate that inconsistency and you can make the product taste consistent, but nobody's ever going to be perfect, right? And so I think that the one huge improvement has just been that we've addressed the greenhouse gas problem that roasting presents. Okay. And I think it is incumbent upon people in the coffee industry to wake up and start taking care of their own business here, right?
Mhm.
Like the cavalry's not just over the hill. We have to clean up our industry. And for the longest time, there was no good way of doing so. There really was only one way to roast coffee. I'll say Loring Smart Roaster, which is another US-based roaster manufacturer, they took a giant step forward, probably now, maybe 20 years ago almost now. They started releasing roasters that consumed a lot less natural gas, right? And it took them a long time for people to adopt their technology and to understand that that was good coffee. And now we've sort of completed that. This is a very long-winded lead up to your actual answer, which is to say that the roast chamber in a bellwether looks a lot like a conventional roast chamber. Okay, and the coffee tastes that way too. It tastes like excellent coffee that has been roasted on a high-quality roaster. So, could you tell the
Very cool.
difference? We frequently do blind taste tests here. People who are in the industry might, they know that we
Hmm.
cup our coffees a lot. Cupping is a term for a very ritualized way of tasting coffee.
Well,
And
wait, go into that. What does that
oh,
entail?
oh my gosh,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, we're never
Okay,
gonna get
you
around to
can't
anything
drop
here,
that.
Kristen.
And I know, sorry,
So
but I'm
cupping
so
is a highly
curious.
ritualized way of tasting coffee. It's the sort of the way that
Hmm.
professionals will do sensorial analysis. Okay.
Hmm.
And what you do is you take, in our case, I'll describe our cupping methodology. You take 12 grams of coffee. We grind them to a specific grind size every time. It has to be the same grind size every time because the finer the particles, the more surface area and the more complete the extraction in water will be. And you want to remove that as a variable. So same grind size every time, always in the same 5-ounce whiskey glasses. From Duratuff. We get ours from Duratuff. They are of the Gibraltar line. And then that's just the name of the cup. That's actually like many people in the industry would probably recognize that they're a popular cup for this activity. Put the ground coffee in there.
We actually have those in our house.
Yeah. They're great glasses too. You can drop them from like a foot and they bounce.
100%. We have 3 boys and I'm like, well, it's probably not going to break. So
that's it.
We're good.
So and then you put hot water in there, and the water always has to be the exact same chemistry because water chemistry matters a lot in coffee. And then it has to be the exact same temperature because temperature matters a lot, right?
What's your optimal temperature for coffee? Because there's tea. I'm a big tea drinker, and there's clearly an optimal time and temperature.
Generally hotter than tea, I will say. I like 204 degrees or so. Okay. Now for cupping, it has to be. I can't remember what the team does in the lab. I think it's either 202 or 204 every time, right? Because again, like 1 degree will change the way the coffee tastes. And when you're cupping coffees and tasting coffees like this, you want to make sure that what you were tasting is the coffee, not a change in your water chemistry or temperature or your grind size or any of the other things that it could be, right?
Yep.
And so you would actually smell the coffee before you put water on it. Then you put water on it, okay? You wait 4 minutes. Then you're going to scrape that stuff off the top. It'll be a little foamy, crusty thing that formed on the top. Then you smell. There's a huge blast of aromatics that comes out when you scrape the crust. Okay, and then you would clean all of that off, and you let it cool until around 13 minutes or so, usually, when it is cool enough that it will not burn your palate. And then you slurp it as you would sort of slurp hot soup. And you are trying to aspirate it and actually kind of vaporize it and get it everywhere in your mouth at the same time. And I'm now like
That's really fascinating.
Oh my gosh, it's very ritualized. Very ritualized. But there's a point. You want to do everything the exact same way every time so that the coffee that comes in, you're always greeting the coffee and understanding the coffee. And in order to fully experience the coffee, you must kind of be experiencing nothing but the coffee. If you want everything else to be so rote and so inconsequential, it's the same way it always has been, that you really only have the coffee speaking to you. So we cup our coffees all the time. We cup our coffees versus coffees from other people's roasters. And we also have done this exercise with many other companies. And yes, the Bellwether roasts coffee just as well as other companies. And those who are out there listening and feel doubt in their hearts, please reach out to us. We're happy to let our coffee do the talking for us around here. We really do 100% believe that we've built the best roaster ever built. I think we built the most controllable and consistent roaster ever. And there's no trade-off with quality at all when you achieve the sustainability.
Well, I clearly don't own or run a coffee shop, but now I'm so intrigued. So if there are, thousands and thousands of coffee shops, and yet, again, another stat somewhere that I read about or heard about that, 70% of consumers prefer making it at home, which is interesting because my husband is a devout coffee person. So he can make it at home, but he likes to get out of the house every morning and go get his cup of coffee. It's his ritual. It's like his meditation practice, right? And he buys, beans from Sweet Maria's and roasts his own coffee. And that smell to me, I don't know what about that smell, but it's really hard for me to smell. But it's, so as a not really a coffee consumer, but as a wife to someone who massively is, have you guys ever thought about creating a smaller version for in-home consumption, just given that breakout?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I have a couple of answers there. Have we ever thought about it? Yeah. I think the future is a fascinating place and you should stay tuned to what's happening at Bellwether. That's all I'm going to say on the topic. But I would also say that most of the people who are consuming coffee in their home are not roasting it in their home, right? That 70% of people who are doing at-home consumption, they are buying their beans somewhere. And I think that that's a little bit more where we would fit in today. Most people are buying their beans, they may be buying them in a coffee shop. A lot of people are buying them at a grocery store. Some people through e-commerce, right?
Yep.
How they get roasted is what we care about most, right? And I think that we really are a little bit on a mission here, because coffee consumers have always proven to be sort of at the vanguard of conscious consumers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Organic coffee was a known product category well before, like, I don't know, before I could even get, like, organic toothpaste or whatever they're trying to sell me these
Yep.
days, right? Like,
Organic
and
toothpaste. No, for sure. I mean, actually, you're really right. I mean, that's the well, the organic industry goes way back. Well, we don't have to get into that. I know too much about that, but
yeah,
I will say, you're right. You could probably find organic coffee before a lot of other organic items in the grocery store.
sure. And I think that people, I'm like, coffee is an internationally traded commodity in some ways, right? And I think that
Hmm.
people care a lot about how their coffee was grown and roasted and processed, and was it
Hmm.
organic. And Fair Trade is another brand that has just a tremendous amount of consumer consciousness, mostly associated with coffee, right? But when they go
Hmm.
and they fill up their car with gasoline, they have no idea where it's coming from and they don't
Hmm.
care, right?
Yeah.
It's always fascinated me that people care so
So
much about
fascinating.
coffee, but it's a gift, right? It
Hmm.
allows coffee to, like, for coffee, the kind of like the conditions under which it was produced are part of its product value,
Hmm.
right? If you were to sell somebody a cup of coffee that tasted absolutely beautiful and there was a little placard next to it that said, like, this coffee was grown in a part of the world where child slavery is still a going concern, that would not be a popular product, right?
Hmm.
But in many
Hmm.
other commodities, we don't care to know, right? But it gives people within coffee the opportunity to really, like, demonstrate new business models and demonstrate that end consumers do care, right? And we find that end consumers do care, right?
Hmm.
The message that we want to get through to them is that, a lot of people switch from dairy milk to milk alternatives, almond milk or oat milk especially, because they are aware of the carbon footprint of dairy milk. Great.
Hmm.
We want to say like, yeah, that's great, but it's not enough, right? And there are other changes in your consumption habits. Like, you must demand this now of people, right? You must
Hmm.
go out to whoever's selling you roasted coffee and say, are you still roasting on a natural gas roaster? Because it shouldn't be a yes answer shouldn't really be acceptable for too much longer,
Hmm.
right? Now,
Well, I love how
it's,
you guys you dove into the kind of
yeah,
the middle section, right? You're not. I mean, we can talk about the growing practices and coffee
hmm
beans and that whole thing, which I know very little about. But you guys really attacked the middle, which is the roasting, because in order to
yeah.
have fresh coffee, you need to roast, right? So, um,
We attacked it because it
it's
makes it
pretty
produces a
fascinating.
lot of greenhouse gases. It's the first
Yeah.
reason, right? It's not
Hmm.
insignificant. The second thing was that it was, in our mind, it was a target that was ripe for disruption because the technology was over 100 years old in most cases.
Hmm.
And so that's sort of like a classic case study of something that a technology that you might wish to disrupt.
Hmm.
And we're not
Well, that's
alone.
perfect, actually.
Yeah, right.
It's
We're not
you're
alone.
attacking that.
Like, there are other people out there that are also, I think we're probably in the vanguard, but there are other
Hmm.
people out there who are beginning to think about electric roasting, other new entrants to the field, and also some of the
Hmm.
legacy players, right? And so what I really want to get across to your listeners right now is that, like, if you care, you need to start pressuring your roaster to switch to electric. And that doesn't necessarily mean a bellwether, although of course we make the best roasters in the world. But but it means that, like, the players in the game, like the people within the roasting industry, within the coffee industry, they're going to listen to you, and they themselves have many reasons not to switch, right?
Hmm.
And part of it is because I think people within the industry really they're tied to these old roasting machines as a way of signifying that their product is artisanal and has a lot of craft,
Hmm.
right? And I get it, but we need new ways of signifying quality and value, other than using equipment that was manufactured in the 1960s, right? It's not a sustainable path forward. Or using equipment that is directly copied from designs from the 1960s, right?
Hmm.
Like, we need to break out of the nostalgia trap and have people understand that good coffee doesn't mean just old-fashioned coffee. Good coffee means coffee that tastes excellent, that fostered positive developments in the place where it was grown and harvested and processed. And that is also facilitating a brighter future for all of humanity and the rest of us here on planet Earth, right? Like, this is it. I guess we believe that there is a great deal of responsibility in this moment in time. But the thing that you have to sacrifice is like less coffee, right? Some people would say, well, you should stop drinking coffee. And we're like, you actually just have to be non-nostalgic about it. There are perfectly sustainable ways of running coffee as a product, right? But you have to choose them. And your supplier is probably terrified to make that change because they think that you buy coffee from them because they roast it on a machine that looks like a choo-choo train. And that's like really what they're focused on, right?
I wonder what's the cost of to put something like that into a coffee shop? And you know, if these guys are getting coffee, I don't know where the 2,000 locations of roasters are, but I'm sure that all adds up, right? Freight, just the cost of, you know, the bean, just everything. I mean, you'd think you'd save long term if you were to put one of these in your coffee shops, but
yes, but there's a huge mental model shift there. That's another, and that's sort of one of the other pieces of inertia that we run into a lot, which is if you've, for a long time, the trajectory of success in the coffee industry has looked pretty much the same. You start on a tiny little roaster. This is what happened at Blue Bottle, for instance. You start on a tiny little roaster, and you succeed, so you move to a larger format roaster, right? So it might be like a 5 kilo to a 10 kilo to a 22 kilo to a 35 kilo to a 70 kilo, right? And each time as your business grows, you're able to get to a bigger roaster, which has certain advantages around the economies of scale, right? One person can make 5 kilos. Eventually, one person can make 75 kilos per batch. And then that encourages you to build out factories. And then you centralize all of your work in these factories, and those become your hubs. And this is the hub and spoke model, right? There's, again, like, there's nothing particularly novel about this. This is kind of like Fordism. Like, this was disruptive at the turn of the 19th to 20th century, but no longer, right? But people like that. They understand, first of all, that that's how other people have succeeded. And so lacking an alternate path to growth and success, that's the one that they know about. It's the one they're going to pursue. And again, there's also something about, like, people feel like it's authentic, right? And the thirst for things that signify that I am authentic is very strong in this industry. Authentic, traditional, old-fashioned, artisanal craft. I mean, we are like the white-hot epicenter of mustaches and leather aprons. Right?
Well, actually, it's funny that you say that because we went to Spain this summer, and that's kind of when I started drinking coffee again. But we went to a lot of these little coffee shops that had the cafes, whatever, and some of them were doing, you know, Keurig K-cups.
Yes.
I like lost my shit because it was this whole, like, you know, you're in Spain, you're kind of, you want tradition, authentic, right? You're craving that, right? And then they go over to like the machine and pop in a K-cup and here you go. But it was really funny because the ones you couldn't really tell the ones who did and the ones who didn't, which was really fascinating. So then I was like, well, wait a minute, like, shouldn't you be able to tell? Maybe it's my long-term COVID.
Yeah, I was going to say, K-cups do not have a great reputation for quality. And my own personal beef with K-cups is that they don't contain very much coffee. It's usually like 15 grams or less, which is a normal 10-ounce cup for me. I'd probably be looking for a 25 gram coffee dose to make a 10 to 12 ounce cup of drip coffee for myself. And for a shot of espresso, I would be looking for 18 to 20 grams too. So I don't think they hold enough, and then the coffees are pre-ground, so it stales, and then there's the noted sustainability concerns about that much plastic.
100%, yeah. I mean, that just like threw me over.
But I will say that I've had a similarly disquieting experience, but it was with a super automatic espresso machine. So they're the machines that do everything. They do all of the work of the barista, grind and tamp and all of that. And they've gotten very good. And There's one manufacturer in particular, and it won't surprise anybody who sort of follows Bellwether, that we um, are fascinated by the coffee quality that comes off of Eversys coffee machines. Although there are many manufacturers, I mean, all the Starbucks, they're all
Hmm.
using super automatic espresso machines. They have been for a long time now. They use them from a manufacturer called Thermoplan,
Hmm.
also a Swiss manufacturer. The Swiss really are like, it kind of makes sense if you think about Swiss watches that they would make very
Yes,
complicated contraptions
definitely.
like this because they're
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
complicated contraptions. But yeah, the coffee has gotten really good from them.
Hmm.
And again, like it makes you wonder, what did I love about this cup of coffee? Was it the way that it tasted and the quality, or was it sort of like intrinsically that it was made by human hand?
Hmm. I think
Because,
there's a little of everything for a
right,
lot of people, I can imagine.
yeah,
Um, so going back to, sorry, and I'm just really curious because I actually don't know this, although I'm sure I could Google this after our conversation. But what is the origin story behind coffee and the
yeah.
commercialization of coffee? And my grandmother, we had Folgers at her
Hmm.
house. The take a little whatever teaspoon, tablespoon. I don't
Yeah,
even know what she did. But I'm really curious because my family didn't drink coffee other than Folgers growing up, and um,
that's like all
it
there
was
was in some sense. I mean,
right.
Folgers and
There's
Eubann and
yeah.
Hills Brothers and Maxwell House, right? And so, um, how did it? Okay, so as quickly as I can. So coffee is a wild plant in Ethiopia, and it's a wild plant in
Hmm.
Ethiopia today. It still grows wild in forests there. Okay, and in long time ago, nobody's exactly sure when, but well over 1,000 years ago, we all think the Ethiopians figured out that this strange little berry, what you had to do was you had to remove the skin and the pulp, which is sweet and fruity and kind of tastes neat,
Hmm.
and get to the seed at the inside. And then you like roasted that seed and you extracted that seed, right?
Hmm.
And the Ethiopian
Hmm.
coffee ceremony is very much alive and well today. And so, if you live someplace where you can see that, it's totally worth doing and experiencing that. And Ethiopia also always kind of knew what they had. And so the story of coffee's propagation and spread in the world is the story of smuggling out of Ethiopia initially. Two
Hmm.
seeds were smuggled out that are incredibly important. The first country outside of Ethiopia that had it was probably what is currently Yemen, and they've been cultivating coffee for at least 1,000 years there. Makes sense. It's like right across the Red Sea. Uh, and then from there, the Dutch took it to Oceania, and that bean is called was the progenitor of what we now know as Typica, which is one of the two major genetic strains of Arabica, which is like the yummy species.
Hmm.
The other one was Bourbon, which was smuggled out and then to the island of Reunion, which was then called the island of Bourbon, and from there to the Americas. And those two seeds form the basis, like the genetic basis for most of the coffee that's grown, most of the Arabica coffee that's grown in the world today, which is crazy. It's so nuts
Whoa.
that
Yeah.
it's a very narrow genetic base for coffee. And one of the reasons that I tend to think that like there are a lot of people who are sort of prognosticators of doom around coffee. And I'm like, well, we've done pretty well for a genetic base of two plants. Like
Absolutely.
things,
That's
who
pretty
knows what
funny.
else is
Yep.
possible? And the wild stock is still there. The wild diversity is still there, right? So there's a lot
Hmm.
left to be done in terms of, and I'm not talking about GMO here. Like we're talking about
Hmm.
like Mendel crosses. Like a lot of work left to be done in coming up with coffee strains that are appropriate for today's world. But anyway, you want to know the story of propagation? So it's now,
Hmm.
it's a story of colonialism for a long time. So land was cleared, a lot of coffee was put in. Coffee was something that it turns out people really liked in Europe and in North America, and very bloody history at that time. It was frequently powered by slavery, and I think it was always expressly like a colonial system where we were extracting value out of colonies through their coffee. And that really sets the stage for like what has happened up through today. Like I often refer to the international coffee system as a post-colonial system where, I can buy coffee at $4 a pound maybe and can make my money here in the US. And
Hmm.
coffee farmers are a much tougher place economically. The risks and rewards are are never shared equitably. Something else we think about a lot at Bellwether.
Hmm. I
Um,
was reading an article, I think it was in the New York Times about that, which was some of the stats around this was really
yeah,
jarring.
yes,
Um,
yes. I think that it's, but we're leapfrogging over a bunch of stuff here. So if you want to know about the
mhm.
history of consumption in the U.S., you asked about Folgers and
Yeah.
stuff like
Yeah, go
that.
back to the consumption. So how did Folgers and Maxwell and all those companies start? And then what was that pivot into where we are today?
Well, there are a
Um,
couple of pivots here, and so coffee was very much part of this country, sort of from the beginning. And I'll sort of start with like during the Civil War. There's all this super fascinating material and research that's happened from the Civil War, where both armies in the Civil War ran on coffee. And when soldiers wrote home to complain to their loved ones about conditions as a soldier, like the soldier's life, the number one thing that they
mhm.
would complain about is if they ran out of coffee. And I think I'm remembering this right. Some rifles had
That's
coffee
funny.
grinders
It's not
built into
like
their stock,
whiskey or it's like
not
coffee.
whiskey. I mean, these are people that didn't have proper
It's like,
clothing, right?
yeah,
But it was,
it's
and when
true.
they
Like no
didn't have
shoes.
coffee, they would roast any other root, chicory or
Mm,
anything else, try and approximate coffee, right? Coffee consumption is very much part and parcel of this country, right? And it used to be common that green coffee, unroasted coffee, would be roasted locally, right? And so you think about something like Maxwell House. To take Maxwell House as an example, Maxwell House was a hotel in Tennessee, I think. Somebody will correct me out there. I can't remember. Somewhere in the Southeast. It was a hotel that was known for great coffee, right? And that was just like the thing. It was a very fractured and diverse landscape of people roasting coffee.
mm,
And then another war happened, World War One. And World War One drove forward a lot of advances in food preservation, canning and drying and things like that. And it was the advent of pre-ground coffee because again, coffee when Americans go to war, they bring their coffee with them. And the idea that you could pre-grind coffee and pack it in a tin allowed for people to have coffee in the trenches. And it is those advances that then ushered in what we might want to call like the first wave of coffee, if you will, right? People talk about waves in coffee. It's a little bit simplistic, but then coffee became like a mass product in the form that maybe you and I grew up with, cans on shelves,
mhm.
right? And then there was a lot of consolidation and the race was to the bottom on cost. And people wanted to make the cheapest and most convenient coffee. And a lot of the concerns about quality were kind of left in the rearview mirror, right?
Mm,
And that whole wave kind of like, then there's like freeze-dried coffee is developed, right? So now there's instant coffee.
yeah.
And that was all the way through my upbringing, right? And this little, like I told you about the Runcible Spoon, it was founded in 1976. They started roasting their own coffee in 1976, and I think that was seen as an absurd idea at the time, right? It's
For
the
sure.
same time,
Especially when you have like the instant like crystals, or maybe that was after,
yeah,
but why would you do that? This is so easy. It tastes
but
fine.
it's the same time that like Fritz Maytag was starting to like brew beer and was thinking about making Anchor Steam, and that the team at Sierra Nevada was getting started, and the team at Samuel Adams was like, they were all home brewers. That was illegal at the time, by the way.
Hmm.
In the Carter administration, a law was passed that made home brewing legal, beer. And these people who'd been craft brewing, like they founded these companies. And it kind of happens that way with coffee too, right? But not as broadly. There is one very important dissident that like powers the rest of coffee. And this guy named Alfred Peet, that Peet's is named after. That's still his company.
Ah,
Okay.
okay.
And Alfred
Didn't
Peet
know that.
was a famously grumpy Dutch guy who lived in Berkeley, California, where I am right now. And he didn't really like hippies, but hippies liked him. And what they liked was that he roasted his own coffee. He had been trained to roast in Europe. And so he roasted his coffee very dark and he roasted it fresh. And that was sort of like novel, right? And he just kind of did his thing. He had some wholesale clients in Seattle, and he got really sick of having to deal with them. He was like an amazing curmudgeon. And so he was like, you know what? Let me just teach you how to roast, right? And those were the team from Starbucks.
I was like, you're totally gonna go there. That's so fascinating. I had no idea of that story.
Yeah. And so
That's
Starbucks,
really cool.
but you have to remember that like at the time, like the first
Hmm.
Pete's, by the way, is here in Berkeley. It's still open. It's not really a tourist trap. You can just go in and it's like a totally normal corner coffee shop. And the first Starbucks in Seattle, if you go, is like almost a little bit shabby, right? Like they had very humble beginnings. And, nobody understood what espresso was in the United States at that time, right? And so all the way through the 80s, like I talked to people who were active at that time, and they'd have to go around and sell espresso machines as cappuccino machines because nobody knew what espresso was, right? And nobody knew what a cafe latte was. They'd maybe heard of a cappuccino, right? But it's like in this time period where the first espresso machines are really landing and making a splash in like San Francisco, in the East Bay and stuff like that. So it's kind of new. And that's the second wave, is the Starbucks wave, if you will. They really popularized espresso drinks, right? And it was sort of like, look at what we can do. It was about process, right? This is a different way of making coffee. And then we steam milk, which was new at the time. We put milk in there, and eventually you can have it with syrups and flavors, right? And that was new. And it was sort of about modifying your coffee beverage, right? No longer just a cup of coffee that may have been made very simply, but like a very processed and refined culinary object. And that runs through.
Latte.
What's that?
And pumpkin spice latte.
Pumpkin spice lattes. But I mean, pumpkin spice lattes are simple now. If you look at, the cold beverages that are available at Starbucks now and the various things you can do, it's really like they offer a very refined experience in that way, right? But kind of analogous to what happened with the slow food movement, although it's not the slow food movement. Kind of analogous to what happened with the American culinary mind turning towards more ingredient-driven cuisines, right? Starting maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s comes the third wave. And that was the Intelligentsias and the Stumptowns and the Blue Bottles and Echo Cafe, and George Howell had been doing it already for a while in Boston. Those of you who are in a place where you can get George Howell's coffee, or Cafe Vivace in Seattle had also started breaking ground here. And they were like, you know what you should taste when you drink coffee is coffee, right? We're going to focus on coffee. And you see the notion of a single origin coffee, that you can truly understand what coffee from Guatemala tastes like. You should taste coffee that is only from Guatemala. And more than just Guatemala, a specific region within Guatemala, and more than just the region, now the farmer, right? And that's why people started to get very touchy about adding milk and sugar to your drink, was that the ethos of the new movement was to strip away a lot of the things that in their mind had been sort of like clouding the experience, and leave you with a more pure, direct, and unmediated experience of the coffee.
Well,
so
thank
we
you
live
for
today
taking us through that timeline.
Yeah. And today we live with all of them, right? Like if you think about something like if you go to your Safeway store, and they'll have like Safeway brand donut shop K-Cups, right? And they're selling them like hotcakes. That's kind of still like that it's a convenience centered coffee drink, right? Not that expensive either, although not that cheap when you really think about how much coffee you're buying. And then right there next to it is the Starbucks, and there's probably a Starbucks in the front of the store. And then at this point in time, it's very likely that you may find a local third wave coffee roaster on the shelf, right? That's roasting lighter, probably single origin, right? They're paying more attention to that kind of thinking. And in the meantime, coffee as a category continues to just dominate in the United States. Like, it's proven to have a pretty wide array of health benefits, at the same time that its old friend cigarettes are maybe very bad for you. And so it sort of stands as one of the last traditional drugs that we still can consume without knowingly doing ourselves harm. And in fact, just the opposite, right? Like it's fresh roasted coffee in particular, fresh roasted and fresh ground coffee is reputed to have a lot of antioxidants, but long-term studies have shown that coffee consumption is very beneficial in preventing liver cancer in particular, also colorectal cancer. It is negatively correlated with things like suicide, right, and depression. It really is. By the way, a lot of these benefits you also derive from decaffeinated coffee if you're somebody who can't handle caffeine. It turns
that's really
out
good to know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, Christy,
that makes sense actually, because the properties are the same. It's just
yes. I mean, decaffeination it's never gentle to the bean to take the caffeine out, but they're able to have it still be the coffee seed, we would say, right?
Hmm.
And if you think about it though, like if I were to say to you, I've got this new amazing wonder drug, and what I did is I went to an arid highland in East Africa and I found a seed, and we're going to drink the extract of that seed,
Hmm.
right? That sounds kind of like the story that people tell you about like quinoa, right?
Yeah,
It's like it actually sounds very
so true.
plausible. The only thing is
Yeah.
that in this case, it's a very traditional culinary object. It's been around for a long time. That tastes that most people really enjoy. And yeah, it has a whole system built up around it and everything.
Super cool. I wanted to get into the whole health benefits, but I know we're very over time and I want to be cognizant of your schedule. Um, I want to shift really fast to I have these questions. You're not really supposed to even think, but it's this or that questions. So,
I'm ready.
ready?
Ready.
Okay. Podcast or books?
Books.
Driving or flying?
Driving.
Caffeine or caffeine free?
Caffeine. Although I drink a lot of
Run.
decaf, I should tell you that I drink a lot of decaf too.
Okay. Notable. That's good to know. Run or power walk?
Run.
Yoga or meditation?
Yoga.
Netflix or Prime?
I've switched to Prime. I don't know how I feel about that.
That's why I'm asking. Spirit animal. What's your spirit animal?
Um, Let me think about that for just a moment. I would say that the animal, I'm not sure about spirit animal. I would say that the animal that I feel the like most kinship to in my habits is probably the American black bear. I've done a tremendous
Hmm.
amount of wilderness travel in my life. I'm fortunate enough to have hiked the
Hmm.
Triple Crown of long distance hiking in the U.S. That's a shameless plug for me. And so that's the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental
That
Divide
I
Trail.
guess that's incredible. I have
So,
not done that.
so I've been around a lot of
Super cool.
bears, and I hear to say bears are really smart. I don't know if I'm really smart, but they're very opportunistic and very like
Hmm.
ingenious, and they get themselves in a lot of trouble. Like my wife has totally noticed this. She'll like find me at the refrigerator in the middle of the night, and I am like pounding a full 1 pound container of blueberries, just like, like you are
Blueberries. I thought
such
you
a
were gonna
black
say
bear.
ice cream or something.
No, 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 no.
Just
She's,
about some blueberries. No big deal.
yeah, I'll just sort of like, I'm like, oh, blueberries. And to me, it seems totally appropriate to just eat a whole pound of blueberries at one sitting. And I was like, yeah, that is a very black bear thing to do, actually, in retrospect.
That's pretty funny, Arno. Okay. Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings?
Mm, Lord of the Rings?
Okay. Operator or visionary?
Operator.
Planet Earth or Mars?
Oh, Planet Earth.
Adventurer or hermit?
Adventure.
Thinker or doer?
Yes.
No, it's either or. Thinker or doer. You have to choose one.
I would be a doer then. But I think that
Uh,
that's a
Riv-
false dichotomy, if I can say that.
I completely understand. I'm asking it anyway.
I know.
Rivian, Tesla, or an old Ford truck? I think I know what you're gonna say.
Um, well, I drive an old truck. I'd like to see somebody come out with a more affordable electric truck.
Yeah, me too. Sushi, steak, or salad?
Sushi.
Morning bird or night owl?
Morning bird.
Spotify or Pandora?
YouTube Music, actually. I gave up on the other two.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. Ninja or warrior?
Warrior.
Introvert or extrovert?
River.
Snow or rain?
No.
Classical or rock?
Classic rock, of course. Rock, I guess, although I do love both.
The known or into the unknown?
Into the unknown any day of the week.
Okay, awesome. What are you the most optimistic about at Bellwether? And where can our listeners find you guys? Website, Instagram, social post? What can we how can we act to support you all?
So what is most optimistic about Bellwether? I think that the thing that is that gives me the most hope for Bellwether is the success that we have seen with people that have engaged with our product. We usually see people increasing their own sales, sometimes by many multiples, because our product allows them to have the most meaningful differentiator you can have. It's a product with hope, right? I mean, like, listen, like, you didn't ask me to go off on a tangent, but here I go. Like, we live in this world, and it's an embarrassment of riches, right? Like, look at this wonderful cashmere sweater and these glasses that make me see well, and these incredible things I have. Like, it's just incredible. Our standard of living is so high. But the one thing that we don't have is the knowledge that we are acting in accordance with the best interests of our children. And in many cases, you don't know how to do it, or it seems so disruptive, right? Like, something as simple as going vegan is hard for somebody like me, and it's really hard for my kids. Even though I recognize the moral imperative that's there, right? And when it comes down to something like what are you going to do if you want to build a home? It's very hard. Like, the concrete is a lot of carbon density, right? Even the battery in your electric car is a lot of carbon density. Like, it's all around you. So what I think that the best thing is that if you're in business and you want to fix it, you have to give people alternatives that are not punishing to them, right? Like, we've definitely followed the alternative meat industry with some interest. Because we think that they're right. We agree with the thesis that you have to give people something that is satisfying to them that they like, if you want them to switch their habits, right? And we see the same thing happening with electric vehicles, of course, right? What did Tesla do? Did they make just another electric car that went around at 50 miles an hour? No. They very intelligently, I think, made one that was faster than internal combustion engine cars. And so it became the fast car that was, and luxurious car that was incidentally electric. And so, yeah, we want to like what gives me hope is seeing that thesis resonate all the way through, right? If you give somebody, this pound of coffee is excellent and this pound of coffee is excellent, but it was grown, harvested, processed, traded, transported, roasted in a way that could be the same for the next 1,000 years, right? Where you are doing the right thing, right? And I'm not it's not political, like, whether, left or right, like, we're also a made in USA device, right? Like, I think that it's beyond that. It's really about using innovation to have hope. And so many people, I think, are caught in a doom loop, right?
I love that. Innovation as hope. It's so true.
I mean, you can use innovation for either.
Right?
You can use it to entrench
but like the
toxic
idea
behavior.
Is that it's hopeful.
Yeah, it's a choice. I think people in business have a choice that sometimes they don't want to have, they don't want to know about it. But your choice is like, are you going to use your power and your innovation and your charisma and acumen and your operational abilities? Or are you going to use it to entrench the old and toxic behaviors? Or are you going to use it to open up doors to a brighter future, right? And that is it's seriously the moral clarion call of our age is to let's get our poop in a group around here, because it's up to us. There's nobody's going to save us. It's up to us.
This podcast is really more about diving into, just industry stuff, like whether that be coffee or healthcare or food or what have you. It could be outside of that. It could be pertaining to spirituality, mental health. But the idea is really not so much, we used to have this podcast over COVID that was really talking about agriculture and the food industry and founders. But what I felt was really missing was that no one's really bringing light to specific industries, and then also companies that are trying to change it for the good, right? Like you guys are fighting the good fight. So that's what we were trying to dive into. So I think it's just really informational and educational for the listener. That's what we're trying to get, and just, entertaining. So I think we definitely achieved that. So
that's good.
I thought it was great.
That's good. My purpose here is really, I have a lot of fun doing this stuff. I think it's probably clear to you, but I really want people to understand their power as consumers at this moment. And I really, again, be it Bellwether or Röst or there's Ailo, like there's a couple Scandinavian companies in the mix now, and the German major dominant roaster manufacturers finally get in the mix too. Like, buy electric roasted coffee, right? If you wouldn't,
Hmm.
if you wouldn't heat your home with coal, then don't buy coffee that's been roasted with natural gas. Like, it's no longer necessary, is really the answer.
That's great. We're going to put that in somewhere. So
Yes, please.
just
Okay.
thanks. Anything else you'd like to just plug in and we can figure out how to put it in there? Anything
Uh,
that you forgot or that you're going to be annoyed by?
well, I mean, the verified minimum income thing is a big deal that I should have dwelled on more. I think that it's also important, like,
Okay.
we touched on this idea of centralized manufacturing versus distributed manufacturing.
Hmm.
And what's happened in coffee is that third wave that I talked about, it exploded, and then there was a big wave of consolidation, right? So, like,
Hmm.
Nestle bought Blue Bottle, and Stumptown was bought by Peet's. Peet's was bought by JAB Holdings. JAB Holdings also bought Intelligentsia, right? And that wave of consolidation has actually continued, right? With big fish buying little fish, and then the giant fish finally taking them all in. And the energy of the industry is really the success of the energy and the future of the industry. And that energy comes from a lot of people trying a lot of different things, and innovation, right? And diversity.
Hmm.
And consolidation runs counter to those. So we're really about distributed manufacturing also because we think that there needs to be a counterweight to consolidation in the industry, right? And there's this thing, like, I guess the other point I like to make when I can in these things is that
Hmm.
the coffee industry we talked about, it's a very moralistic industry, and everybody wants to tell you about how good they are. We're doing the
Hmm.
right, like, this bag is compostable. Who cares if your bag is compostable, by the way? That
Hmm.
is such a small amount of
Hmm.
material,
Hmm. I
right?
know.
Is the truck you delivered it in
Yeah.
compostable? No.
Yeah.
Okay, well then let's stop talking. Um, so, but everybody's like very into virtue signaling in coffee,
Hmm.
right? But things don't really change. The farmers don't really get paid any better, right? And the same amount of natural gas is expended roasting it, and all the ills of the industry persist, right? And so I like to
Hmm.
say that if you really want to reform, like, and have a revolution, a bottoms up reform, then you give the people at the bottom disruptive technology.